the last few years, I've been asking myself the same question over and over. Whenever a new electronic device is released by a major technology company, why is it that contemporary hardware electronics design seems to be stuck in the modernist era? Contemporary hardware design is rife with minimal reflective monochromatic geometric forms, which, although we've grown used to them in the 21st century, would look just at home in 1910 in a modernist house designed by Le Corbusier. In this talk today, all of you are going to come away with a knowledge of design theory covering the last 200 years, and why design isn't just about making something look good, it's actually about representing morality. I hope that all of you come away from this talk with a new perspective of design, and the next time you make a new piece of technology, regardless of whether that's software or hardware, you'll be able to bring a strong awareness of the history of design to improve the way that your users engage with your work. The most important question that gets asked when an architect is designing a new building is, which is more important, form or function? I've always been surprised that I've never heard this question being asked in an engineering meeting. Today, I'm going to teach all of you why this is such an important question to ask when you're creating a new product, and to give you a quick history lesson of the different arguments that it contains. As you can see, I have drawn out a map of the different arguments about form versus function, which I've ranked by period of time and morality. This will be our orientation map for today. Much like drawing out the political spectrum from far left to far right, where at a certain point fascism and communism become remarkably similar to each other, the same applies to the spectrum of design morality, with the moral repugnancy of the extremes of decoration and utility mirroring each other. Before we can get to the heart of the modernist theory of form follows function, which defines our current era of hardware design, first we need to go back to the 19th century to understand where the term comes from. In order to do this, we're going to go right the way back to the German opera houses in the 1850s. The term Gesamtkunstwerk was first coined by German philosopher Carl Friedrich in 1827. It describes a total work of art that seeks to bring together elements of various artistic disciplines to create a unified and harmonious whole. It became popularized by the operatic works of Richard Wagner from the 1816 onwards. Wagner believed that the fragmentation of the arts since the Greek era had created subpar works of art and sought to unify the arts again to herald in a new era of artistic greatness. This was seen through his operas, and the best example of this is Wagner's epic four-part opera, The Ring Cycle, which combined music, singing, set design, and drama into a revolutionary and new monumental art form. This concept was the takeoff point for the modernist era of design that came to define the 20th century, with its effect particularly felt in the works of the great early 20th century architects. Okay, so with that historical context covered, let's get straight into the core question. Is form more important than function? The modernist movement started in the 1900s and arguably is still continuing today. The early 20th century saw the rise of mass manufacturing and the second industrial revolution. The machines had arrived and they were here to stay. This changed the language of the time. Houses were no longer epicenters of the domestic. They were objects of purpose, objects that can and should be optimized. As the father of modernism, Le Corbusier, put it, a house was now a machine for living in. This is the Villa Savoy, the first real prototype for modernist design. It's startling to look at this house from 100 years ago and feel how contemporary it still is. The modernist movement put forward that form should follow function. The function of this house was an ideal of what an educated modern family should be. Designed as a weekend holiday home, this is perhaps the most recognized work of architecture by Le Corbusier. The interiors and exteriors encourage movement and a freedom of discussion inspired by the long horizontal windows which flood the open space with light. Whilst the pilotis at the bottom create an unearthly futuristic hovering, they are actually incredibly practical, as they allow cars to be parked close to the front door and protected from the elements. The Modernists pioneered a reductivist approach to design based on functionalist goals expressed through their use of basic geometric forms that could be mass-produced, but that also highlighted a new democratic secularism emerging in the early 20th century. The Modernists were concerned with reshaping society through experimentation and the application of science and technology to everyday life. The embrace of industrialism to create universal, democratic designs. They were inspired by the Shaker movement in the USA in the late 19th century, which rejected the opulence of Catholic design and prized simple, functional houses, farms, and churches that contributed to the egalitarian improvement of their society. As you can tell, the Modernists are really the centrists of the design morality spectrum. They wanted their designs to be functional and accessible, but they also wanted to improve the lives of their users and encourage them to culture themselves. There's always space in modernist design, a Gentile optimism for an ideal, balanced existence. Let's head to our first extreme design concept now, the thing that modernists were rebelling against: decoration. Decoration is the means by which a design is embellished and has nothing to do at all with functional purpose. It's all style, and any substance that it does have is limited to the realm of the symbolic. At its best, it may make you think about a core religious or artistic concept, but you can't actually sit on it. Decorating is not only a form of creative expression, it's also a way of imbuing design with its own character, symbolism, and meaning. Decoration has, however, always been subject to the evanescence of fashion. The rich decorative traditions of folk and tribal art reveal that the urge for decoration is as old as the human species itself. The level of decoration in society, at least pre-modernism, is a good barometer for economic well-being. If a population is having to scratch out a subsistence living, it simply doesn't have time to devote itself to the decoration of objects. However, this starts to change in the Victorian era with the rise of mass production. The status of decoration changes dramatically here because it came to be used to hide flaws, cover shoddy quality, or mimic handcrafted production in mass-produced objects. This is when decoration gains its morally repugnant status, when it became used to trick users into thinking that objects were more valuable than they actually were. Even today, the use of the term Gaudi originates from these shabby mass-produced objects as much as from the snobbishness of old money culture. So let's go back to our design morality roadmap and let's take a closer look at styling. Styling occupies a really interesting space between decoration and unity. It's fundamentally a commercial concept concerned with aesthetics, but it doesn't completely ignore the practical elements of objects. Styling is defined by being a practice of updating a product's appearance to make it more appealing to consumers, but without enhancing its functionality. This is especially true in the design of household objects and consumer electronics. This is best summed up with the Linea Italiana movement of the mid-century. During the post-war period and into the 1950s, Italian designers utilized styling as a means of establishing a serious foothold in the international design scene. The so-called Linea Italiana, aka the Italian line, was a form of visually seductive streamlining achieved by wrapping a product in sensuous flowing skin. And this was the easiest and most effective way Italian designers could compensate for any technical difficulties. This focus on styling enabled Italy to turn itself into an economic design powerhouse following the destruction of the Second World War. Ultimately, styling is all about sheathing a product in a skin that strengthens its eye appeal. The legendary industrial designer Raymond Loewy viewed styling as a way of allowing the design to express itself, whilst also helping to, as he put it, streamline the sales curve. Perhaps Loewy's best explanation of why styling mattered was the motto printed on his business card. Between two products equal in price, function, and quality, the better looking one will outsell the other. This was, and still is, an irrefutable fact of design. And now we come to unity, the most direct descendant of Gestandskunstwerk. Unity is a synthesis of form, function, and materials, whereby visual and structural harmony is achieved. It is a highly multidisciplinary conceptual framework, borrowing from the ecological sciences, materials engineering, fashion, sociology, architecture, and soundscaping. Beyond this, when a design possesses a constructural oneness, it is also easier to produce because the fewer components something has, the easier it is to replicate. This concept was popularized by the Bauhaus school in Germany in the 1920s with their new slogan, "Art and Technology, a New Unity." This was to represent a shift in their focus from the fine arts and design to industrial mass production. However, it is perhaps architecture that we see the best of our earlier concept of Gesamtkunstwerk come to fruition. The remarkable buildings such as Habitat 67 and Bosco Verticale are undeniably the total work of art concept come to life. Frank Lloyd Wright spearheaded unity-based architecture with his pivotal house Falling Water, constructed in Pennsylvania in 1935. Dug deep into a rock ledge projecting over a waterfall in a deep wooded countryside, the cantilevered balconies of Falling Water imply that the building defies gravity. Predominantly made out of steel and stone, the building is designed to appear as though it is organically part of the landscape. Inside, the flagship stones and furniture designed by Wright help to link the interior and exterior to result in what Wright described as organic architecture. In fact, Frank Lloyd Wright went so far as to design clothes for his female clients inhabiting his houses in order for them to better fit in with their architectural environment. The total art concept is about the completion of all aspects of a design not always thought about architects, and Wright was the master of this. Now we'll start to find out what happens when you remove more and more of the form part of the form versus function argument. Allow me to introduce you to the Zen concept of purity. Purity is the concept of cleanliness and virtue of design equated with high morality. The idea of design purity tends to center on the purification of form through the purging of any superfluous ornament, and as a result, objects that display a structural purity invariably possess a strong, stripped-down elemental property. In line with the Modernists, the purists also rejected the degenerate morality of mass-produced decoration. It was the Austrian architect-designer Adolf Loos who most memorably linked the idea of design purity with moral decency in his seminal 1908 essay Ornament and Crime, in which he argued that decorative embellishment was indicative of cultural degeneracy. In response to the horrors of the First World War, there was a strong desire within the international design community for a forward-looking purification of design. This linking of social morality with design purity was also part and parcel of the interwar obsession with health and hygiene. The aesthetics of purity have been a defining feature of traditional Japanese design and architecture. The purists believed that their design should possess a strong sense of purity both inside and out, based on the spiritual belief of Shinto that all things, animate and inanimate alike, possess an essential soul, or metaphysical perfect form. Design purity was seen as an attribute of good design during the post-war period, with Isamu Nogushi's IN50 table being a perfect example of formal purity expressed through the language of organic design. And here we come full circle to the morally repugnant concept of utility. Great for political theories, not so great for making objects that make people feel good about their lives. Utility in design is about making something as useful as it can possibly be. This implies that objects are stripped down to their functional bare bones, whereby no superfluous decoration impedes their ability to do the job they were specifically designed to do. Utility design has deep roots in the concept of tool making, a tool designed purely to perform its function, and nothing else will outperform one that is weighed down with ornamentation. For example, Garden shears must be lightweight and strong. Any other addition would make them unnecessarily expensive, difficult to manufacture, and arduous to operate. Beyond the ancient history of tools, utilitarian design was, of course, based on the philosophy of utilitarianism. The greatest, happiest for the greatest number, maxim of Jeremy Bentham, that many of you in the audience will already be familiar with. These designers followed a very strict version of form follows function, a borderline communist dedication to design for the purpose of social reform. Their argument was that if a product was stripped of all decoration and designed purely as a means to a functional end, then all the materials and production value would go into the integrity of its construction and ability to complete its purpose rather than how it looked. In turn, this would mean that these objects would not only be better by design, but they would also be more affordable. Despite the good intentions of the utilitarian designers, the working class consumers at whose these goods were marketed were not receptive to their stark plainness. It was impossible for users to remove the associations of starvation, rationing, and premature death from these designs. Well, there you have it. We've completed our stroll through 200 years of design history, but it would be unfair to end this on a loose note. What does all of this history mean in terms of how we can understand the designs that surround us today, especially the design of electronics? Post-democratic modernism defines objects which utilize the aesthetics of democratic design as championed by the modernist, but which are not, in practice, supportive of democratic rights. There are many reasons why this movement has arisen, and the implications of this new design ethos is something that is only just starting to be understood. One thing is for certain. In 100 years from now, we will be looking back at this pivotal moment of design in the history books. Part of the reason this movement has arisen is due to the increased knowledge gap between end user and designer. Only a minority of users are capable of adapting electronics to maintain privacy. How many of you have read a single user agreement? Not only that, even if you did read every single user agreement and had a robust knowledge of multiple coding languages, you would still struggle to dissect what is truly going on with your data due to the monumental scale of teams of experts required to make our smartphones, laptops, and tablets. Seemingly, technology profits has scaled exponentially alongside with the complexity of their products. However, I'm also not going to leave you on a message of doom. As with all design movements, there is always a counter-movement a stone throws away in another part of the world. Although it's on the fringes of the art, design, and technology world, a movement that I've dubbed, at least for the moment, digital Art Nouveau has emerged. Digital Art Nouveau combines breakthroughs in early 21st century science with fractal geometry and biomimicry to explain new methods of manufacture. We are seeing this emerge in fashion via the works of Iris van Herpen, through radically new methods of manufacturing supporting columns that are as beautiful as they are useful by architect Michael Hansmeyer, and through my company's work on predictive biometric devices. There are clear reasons as to why we're now seeing this movement occur. A good chunk of it is due to the rekindling of the closeness between art and science. Designers and architects are gaining increased coding literacy. 3D printing technologies are expanding into materials far beyond plastics into concrete and steel. Machine learning is now accessible to almost everyone due to the ability to rent supercomputing power from companies such as Amazon. And the impetus of universities such as MIT and Stanford to upload all of their technical courses online for free to the public to undertake. Of course, trends in mathematics are also contributing, with the purist fascination with Euclidean geometry being replaced with the rise of mainstream breakthroughs in fractal geometry. Finally, there is the ethical counter-movement to designs that take power away from users. The Millennial and Generation X designers behind this movement are rebelling against today's democratic crises by attempting to find ways to merge automation with democracy. To conclude, One of the themes you may have noticed come up again and again during this stroll through design history is the impact of the First and Second World Wars on designers, artists, and architects. It's been 70 years now since the last World War. Our wars are no longer fought in the field. They are now fought with trade embargoes. Our fear is less direct, more of an undulating paranoia simmering beneath the surface. Uneasy thoughts of nuclear war and cyber-political sabotage invading the spaces between breaths and audiobooks as we travel from home to work and back again. I cannot help but wonder if this is one of the reasons the trends in electronic design are now also defined by concealing what goes on beneath the surface. The smartphone screen getting ever larger, now running right the way around the object, shimmering and reflecting the user back at themselves, whilst concealing the seemingly Gnostic circuitry and data infrastructure beneath. The United Nations released a report this week stating that Facebook and Google are now considered in breach of human rights with their unethical use of users' data. It would be deliberately ignorant to not recognize the impact that social media has had in manufacturing the most shocking global political plot twists that have happened for the last 5 decades, particularly the targeted political sabotage of Cambridge Analytica and the Russian government using the most cutting-edge developments in natural language processing and sentiment analysis to force-feed premeditated misinformation down the gullets of users. As technology professionals, it is our responsibility to not shy away from these issues, to rethink the impacts of what we are designing, to look outside of what we are taught at universities and specialized courses and what we see on the news every day. Above all, it's our responsibility to recognize that, whether we realize it or not, we are all participants in the prevalent design movements of our era. It's just up to you to decide which one you want to be a part of. Thank you for listening. If you're interested about finding more about the intersection of technology, morality, and design, I would like to recommend the following books, which I'll leave on the screen as I exit the stage. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your StartCon.